It was quite a challenging moment when I returned home. My wife was not there. I noticed that the time was approaching 10 in the evening, and I was curious where she spent her late evenings. Recently, Natasha started coming home late, sometimes staying at a friend's place or working late. Before, I didn't pay much attention to it, thinking that anything could happen. However, on this evening, returning home, I pondered about it. Perhaps after finding no groceries in the fridge, she stopped cooking for several months. There was always something to snack on, but this time, there was complete silence outside the window. Suddenly, the sound of a car was heard and the door creaked. My wife had arrived and, as I noticed, it was particularly late today. After a few minutes, the click of the front door was heard, but there was no usual joyful atmosphere of her arrival. I usually expected loud announcements of her arrival, but this time there was silence. "Hello," she said. "There's nothing at home at all. Maybe we can go to a cafe and have a little celebration," I suggested, trying to maintain composure. I didn't want to create a scandal over an uncooked dinner. I approached to hug her around the waist and suggested spending time together. Reminiscing about the old days, the attempt to kiss her was rejected. "Yura, we need to talk," she said, and from her tone, I understood that something unpleasant awaited us. I also noticed that she avoided my gaze. I thought something had happened. Against the background of a vague sense of impending trouble, my heart began to beat faster. "What happened at work? Do you have problems?" I asked. And she sat down, avoiding my gaze. "Yura, I'm leaving you. I suggest we do without scandals and relationship explanations. I've fallen in love with someone else and want to be with him. You've always been a good husband and father. The problem is not with you, it's just how life goes. A person deserves happiness." Natasha looked at me with a guilty look. "Forgive me, but I can't do it anymore." Due to the unexpectedness of it, my speech froze for a while. I just stared ahead, trying to focus my gaze. My heart felt like it sank into my stomach and beat uncertainly there. In response to my questions about the children, she answered angrily, stating that they were already adults, and she would explain everything to them herself. After almost 40 years of working as a housekeeper, laundress, and nanny, she believed that she had ceased to be a woman, forgetting that she could also be loved. Thus began the story where she met another man and decided to leave for him. I tried to understand and accept this information. Natasha pulled out a pack from her purse and took out a thin cigarette. This was a real surprise for me. My wife smoked, and I didn't know about it. I was curious. "Who is your new man?" Trying to hide my emotions, I focused on the conversation. Natasha told me about the artist who, according to her, was very talented. Lighting the cigarette, she looked at me, and in her gaze, I sensed the unspoken. It was strange that she didn't finish her thought, but the expression on her face told me a lot. She had never cared about what I was doing, considering my writing pursuits something insignificant. The thought of her leaving seemed like some absurdity in the context of the current situation. Natasha wanted to take the apartment and half of the shared money, announcing her new plans. Hearing this, I felt emptiness inside, and property divisions seemed inconsequential. Trying to calm down, I said that I didn't have the strength for this process. Her face showed no emotions, and she left, leaving me in ignorance of what had happened. On the road, in the car, she met someone, and their kiss felt like a blow to my chest. We got married quite early by the standards of that time, and our years together were filled with children and military service. I continued my career, but a severe head injury in a military conflict abruptly ended my life. Thanks to my service, I was granted a disability pension and an order. However, the authorities quickly forgot about me. At that moment, I realized that my years of service had become inconsequential and the life I knew had fallen apart. Natasha had always been there, supporting me in difficult times. But now, she was sorting out her own issues, and I felt like all those distant years were somehow wasted. Emotional fatigue, a void inside me, and a sense of loss filled the entire evening. Time had given me a lot, but it had also taken away a lot, and I realized that there was more to overcome. Natasha, what did you do after I returned from the army? I started working in my first specialty at a large metallurgical plant, and after 7 years, I reached the position of chief engineer, so we didn't have financial problems, and it continues to be the case even now at 55 when I retired. Out of boredom, unexpectedly for myself, I started writing. Mostly, they were notes, and it could have continued until my story was published in a magazine in Voronezh. Later, I was offered to write a screenplay based on this story, and a year later, a film with my name in the credits appeared. This success pushed me to release the first collection of stories, and then another. Finally, a major Moscow publishing house signed a contract with me, and I started receiving good fees for what no one wanted to read before. Fate plays with a person, and a person plays the pipe. I thought, evaluating my journey, throughout this time I had no reason to reproach Natasha. At least, I never suspected that she was unfaithful to me. The children grew up, both started their families, and we had grandchildren. Our life with Natasha was prosperous as far as I could judge. Throughout the years of marriage, I never raised my voice to her, and there were no refusals in anything. I enjoyed giving her gifts, and once I even fulfilled her long-standing dream by buying her a car after receiving a fee. Then I bought an old wooden house outside the city, near the forest and the lake, where we planned to spend the rest of our days together. Natasha managed to maintain her natural beauty, almost without resorting to the help of cosmetologists. It pleased me to see envious looks from those around us when we were together, and I was proud that my wife looked so attractive. Women, they say, live by emotions, not reason, I thought. Recalling moments of our love, Natasha always said she loved me, and in those moments, I believed that she truly felt it. But those moments passed, and I realized that a woman's love for a man can be inconsistent. I realized that, like a naive idiot, I didn't always understand the complexities of relationships between a man and a woman. Perhaps it was time for a different female logic. Life is a strange thing. Sometimes it seems that even women themselves cannot fully understand it. For a long time, I stared into the dark window, as if trying to read my future there. With Natasha's departure, my soul became empty, and only half of me remained. At some point in the morning, I packed my things and called Natasha. She didn't pick up the phone for a long time, and when she finally answered, I made room for her. As for the past, leaving behind a past life. We are no longer husband and wife, we've become strangers, each moving in our own direction. As I left, I felt a vague regret in Natasha's eyes. Perhaps she felt it too. I nodded in the direction of my now ex-wife, put my hands in my pockets, and walked away along the sidewalk, scattered with yellow leaves. Her future life ceased to be my concern, and I immersed myself in the whirlwind of unfinished business. The publishing house sent me a layout of a new book for revisions. The film studio called about the screenplay. The editor from the magazine to which I submitted a story almost 2 years ago finally got in touch, demanding explanations. It turned out that my story had already been published by another publication. They threatened me with legal action, but I had no contract with them, so I sent them away. All this time, I stayed in a hotel, trying to leave this city that reminded me of my past life. As for Natasha, I knew nothing about her. There were rumors that things were not going smoothly in her new life. Perhaps her young lover had specific demands. Apparently, in their relationship, the key words were money and real estate, taken from me after the divorce. Their passion would be eternal until her money ran out. A one-day woman, as they call them. I encountered Natasha with her new partner in the supermarket, a mediocre man with an expression of contempt for the whole world. They started kissing, and I felt that this love would not last long. All mutual friends were shocked. The children, it seemed, didn't particularly care about the divorce. I left for 2 weeks to shoot a series based on my story. It was a new experience for me. Upon my return, the lawyer informed me that Natasha had put the apartment up for sale when I asked where she would live. I got an answer that she didn't know, but her new partner probably covered some serious debts. I thanked the lawyer and decided that her life was now her problem. After I had a cup of coffee, I greeted and bowed. 2 days after meeting with the lawyer, I learned that my apartment had been sold, and Natasha disappeared from my sight again. Papers and affairs were piling up more and more. And at some point, I realized that I couldn't handle this flow without an assistant. Thus began the search for a suitable candidate. I didn't have to think long, and I placed an ad in the classifieds indicating only a contact phone number. Among the many candidates, Jean caught my attention, a young woman with a philological education, excellent command of several languages, and computer skills. She quickly and professionally processed texts, promptly responded to emails, and kept records of my activities. For Jean, I rented a workspace, and I sent finished materials to her email. Personal life took a backseat. I decisively gave up relationships with women, thinking that my old age left no chances for success in a gendered context. However, I noticed changes in my relationship with Jean. She began to show more interest in me, often appearing in the hotel room where I worked during morning visits. She treated me to coffee with homemade pastries, didn't impose her company, but I felt that she was increasingly involving me in her affairs. One autumn evening, returning to the hotel after exhausting negotiations and dinner, I found that my room was not locked, only Jean had the key. I cautiously entered the room and discovered Jean. Together we spent a pleasant evening, which ended with a passionate embrace. Answering the phone call, I returned to reality. But that attraction in Jean's moist eyes did not leave me indifferent. The phone call from the hospital woke me up, and on the other end, I heard an anxious voice. A doctor from the city hospital informed me that my ex-wife, Natasha, had been brought in here in critical condition after an assault. At first, I didn't comprehend what was happening, as we had long been divorced. Nevertheless, her phone still had my number labeled as husband. It turned out she urgently needed surgery and money was required for that. On the way to the hospital, thoughts about what had happened overwhelmed me. The doctor told me that she had been beaten, with a broken arm, collarbone, and several ribs, and there was also evidence of sexual assault. Even before that, he noted that she had been living with another man after our divorce. The doctor expressed suspicion that I might be involved in these events, but the police eventually confirmed my innocence. The situation became even more complicated, considering that money was needed for the surgery, which I didn't have readily available. In desperation, I turned to the editor, asking for an advance for a book I hadn't written yet. He agreed to help, and I quickly obtained the necessary amount. In the end, I transferred the money to the hospital's account and became a witness to Natasha's fight for life. The situation was developing rapidly, and I had to urgently address numerous challenges. I headed towards Natasha. The next day brought a message from the doctor that the surgery was successful, and she would soon start recovering. The doctor's look when the police described her fall down the stairs and the assault raised my concern. I was invited to the room, but not for long. As she was still very weak after the anesthesia, Natasha lay in bed covered with a sheet, with various tubes and wires. Upon entering, I saw tears in her eyes, and she tried to say something. I comforted her, promising that everything would be okay. Avoiding deep conversations, the time for sorting out relationships had passed, and now the main task was to help without reopening old wounds. The children often visited her, creating an illusion of family recovery, but it was illusory. Several months later, Natasha was discharged, and my assistance was no longer needed. Before leaving, I handed her documents and keys to the apartment. announcing that I managed to buy her property and put it in her name. She tried to express gratitude, but tears were more eloquent. The question of what had really happened haunted me. Natasha stubbornly remained silent, and I decided to unravel the mystery myself. Conversations with neighbors revealed the picture of Natasha's turbulent life with her new husband. Their relationship, starting with financial matters, turned into conflicts and fights one day. She became a victim of violence while trying to drive her husband's drunken friends away. This led to assault and prolonged torment. All this time, she had kept silent about her suffering. Natasha was tied to a chair. But when their attackers passed out in a drunken stupor, she managed to untie the ropes and escape from the apartment, anticipating the unfolding events. It became clear why her new husband never showed up to check on her. Life can take strange turns following this incident. One of Natasha's rapists ended his own life by throwing himself out of his kitchen window. In a state of drunkenness, the police, as usual, faced difficulties in determining the reasons for his desperate act. Another aggressor was found dead by his own hands, having hanged himself, and here everything was clear. The preceding night of drinking with friends led to a hangover syndrome that inevitably influenced his fate. It was already deep into the night when I approached the location, parking the car a block away from the house where the studio of a talented artist was situated. Putting on gloves and a hood, I walked up to the right entrance. After entering the access code, I ascended to the designated floor where two apartments were located using lockpicks. I gently unlocked the door and entered a standard Khrushchevka, with two adjacent rooms and a kitchen. In the room, amidst easels and unfinished paintings, the self-proclaimed great artist slept on a sagging couch. The smell of alcohol hung in the air. Encountering this scene, the thought crossed my mind, Natasha, didn't you foresee who you were leaving with? It's incredible how passion can blind women. Grabbing the artist by the shoulder when he began to show signs of life, I knocked him out with a swift blow. Waking up, he was surprised to realize his restraint. His eyes expressed shock. Carefully removing the tape from his mouth, I wanted to hear his voice, to find out if he recognized me. He whispered softly but convincingly, I didn't mean to. Please forgive me. He, too, was whispering, aware of the futility of screaming. The air carried a specific smell, indicative of his fear. Poor guy. It was a signal for me that it was time to end this. Sealing his mouth again, I slowly retrieved the silenced pistol from my holster. The round was already in the chamber, and I didn't have to reload. Then I put him in a plastic bag to leave no traces and aimed the gun at his head. Quietly pulling the trigger of the TT pistol, I took a shot, directing the bullet right on target. After that, I quickly changed clothes, hiding both the clothing and the weapon, as well as the gloves, in a bag. Driving along the waterfront, I decided to stop and get out of the car. The moon sparkled over the river, creating a silver trail of light that stretched almost to the shore. I decided to take action. Throwing the bag into the water, 3 years passed. My car carried me along the highway, shaking off the light snow that had fallen overnight and leaving a quickly covered trail behind. After switching from asphalt to a dirt road, I slowed down. Lost in thought, the road became increasingly impassable, delving into a dense forest. About 8 kilometers and I reached the destination. Turning at the next intersection, a large house built of pine logs stood before me in this secluded place. Parking the car near the boathouse, I noticed sturdy Native American structures with wooden patterns and charred moose antlers on the gable. Unpacking a voluminous bag from the trunk, I climbed onto the porch where I was greeted by a young woman holding the hand of a little boy. Jean, embracing me, uttered a greeting, looking into my eyes. The little boy, clinging to my leg, joyfully announced that his dad had come and bought something. Hugging my son, I confirmed that, indeed, I had bought something.